Hi, I'm Carol.
Hi, I'm Lisa. Welcome to the Grief Gurus, a place for honest conversations about grief, coping, and living with loss.
We believe grief is part of your story, but it's not the whole of your story. And today we're going to talk an interesting subject. Partly when we're in grief, the hardest part can be like it feels like the world is moving on without you. Lisa, did you find that when you were grieving that it felt like everybody had just got back to normal and you were grieving and why didn't they realize that?
Absolutely. I'm just having a flashback to I remember driving one time and I would just, you just see people driving around in their cars and you're like, how is it possible that they're carrying on these strangers, nobody that I even knew, that they're just going through their day and buying milk and cutting me off in traffic or whatever it is. And it's like, don't they know my daughter died?
Yeah,
Like it's kind of a baffling, and in the beginning, I think it feels like a shock,
yeah,
and over time, it can kind of develop into this feeling of almost like a betrayal or like being offended somehow. That like I remember, arguing with nature, like how can the sun come up? Like how can the sun come up? My daughter's dead. Like
yeah,
how can, and it's you go down these endless questions. Of course, over time you realize that's just nature, and of course we have to keep going, but in the beginning it certainly felt, definitely felt offensive, and it was definitely a shock to my system. What was it
yeah.
like for you?
I I think the hard part, I think for me is after the funeral, most people kind of move away and don't call you as much and they feel like you should be back to normal now because after all we've had the funeral or the memorial and time to get back to normal. And of course that's right for them. They are getting back to their lives. They have lives to live, but you're just starting your grief journey. You're just starting that process of learning what it's like to live without your person. And it really does feel like nobody understands this. And actually, they don't because they're not living it.
Right,
Right?
right.
I mean, that's the truth. How many of us did understand that? And so it really can feel like, I guess, a sense of betrayal or that you've been left behind or that nobody cares. And I don't think that's the case. I think it's just that we are so sensitive and so in our own sadness, so bereft that we cannot fathom how the world continues without our person, without everybody stopping. And of course, it's not realistic, that's not going to happen. But we were talking before we were recording about how important it can be for people to remember the date of the death of your loved one. And
Mhm.
I was sharing with Lisa that Brian, as a jazz pianist, used to teach at a jazz camp. And one of the students there every year remembers the day that Brian died and sends me a little note on what she's doing and what she's playing and how she's doing. And it fills my heart. And what surprised me actually was that it was not necessarily my closest friends that remembered the days. It was people, like his students, like a different friend. And I'm like, wow, they still remember well, it's going to be 8 years this year. And so I've really tried to do that myself for people to remember the date. We were talking about needing a calendar to put these dates on, like a death
It's terrible.
calendar. It's it makes you laugh, but it means so much to get a little heart to say, I'm thinking of you today. It means everything. So if you're listening to this and you know the anniversary of somebody's death is coming up, send a little text message, make a call, send a card, whatever. It can just be a heart and a text. Show people you haven't forgotten them and you haven't forgotten their loved one. I can't tell you how much that means. It is everything, and it shows that yes, the world's moved on, and they remember you and they remember your loved one. Have you found that, Lisa? Do people still remember for you?
Yes, I would say certainly at these far out times from
Yeah.
my daughter and son dying, it's been so long. Certainly, people in my close circle of family and friends
Hmm.
do think of it and do reach out, and every once in a while, someone who I hadn't ever really heard from seemed they've been thinking of this date every year, and for whatever reason they decided to reach out. It's so it to your point, it is so comforting. It goes to that piece that we always talk about in the grief gurus of having your grief witnessed.
Yeah.
It validates and it normalizes almost the experience of the loss. But I want to go back to something else that you said, which was, sometimes it just feels like, well, people are moving on, yeah, their life's going back to normal, and yet we're still figuring out what our life is now. But we want to be careful a little bit not to judge, if we don't
Mm-hmm.
see others grieving. I think there's an easy tendency to come up with a narrative that suits our own needs at the time, which
Yeah.
for me in the past might have been something like, well, it must be nice that you can just sleep like a baby these days, or it must be nice that you can go to a Christmas party and, not have to think about, oh, am I going to run into the bed? It's just all this comparison stuff going
Yeah.
on. And we know
Yeah.
how dangerous and bad that can be for our own healing. But so we just want to guard against, when we do feel like things are moving along without us, to just not take it personally, which is really hard because we might feel like, well, if you really love them, why would you be moving on, kind of thing. But I would share my own experience with just even the sun coming up. And I use this to illustrate the fact that it's not rational when we feel this way, but like I would get mad that the sun came up.
Yeah.
Like I would feel like, how dare you? My
Yeah.
daughter's gone. My life is over. I have nothing, which is of course none of those things. Of course, my daughter being gone was true, but all the rest of it is just my brain's, attempt to create a story around something that doesn't make sense, but it's not personal. And in fact, I would also say that sometimes the nature of things continuing at their own pace and the normalcy of that, we need people to continue to carry on. Because
Oh,
if we all lose our shit, then what
nothing
happens next? Nothing,
nothing
right?
works. And it's
Nothing, and
interesting.
eventually that crashes down around us too, right?
It's not personal, and yet it's so personal, right? It's interesting, right? It's this is so personal to me. It's my loved one, my daughter, my husband, my brother, whatever, whoever it is. It's very, very personal. But the reaction of others is not the personal part. And that's where we can sort of mix it up a little bit. We give grace, we don't judge them because they don't understand. And of course, they really do have to get back to their jobs, to their life, to their family. And I think people are very good in the first couple of weeks. They do tend to come around, they do tend to check in, and then it sort of peters out a little bit. And I think part of the issue is the whole timeline thing with grief. Certainly at a year, people mainly don't even think about the death or that you're still grieving. And you might still be quite in the depths of it. Remember, a couple of years is acute grief. And so for 2 years, most people don't even consider that you would be grieving then and don't think to ask. But you're still dealing with that on a daily basis. It becomes your whole life for a part of it, doesn't it? It really is. That's all you can think about. And so when people don't acknowledge that, you feel hurt. So, as Lisa said, it's not personal, and I'm saying it's not personal, and yet it is so
It's
personal. So there's
very
that
personal.
confusing and muddying the waters. But life does go on, and the sun does rise every single day, and the flowers come out, and the trees lose their leaves, and then they bud again. We're in spring now, and that is the normal process. And this is grief. It is hard, and you're in it, and it's normal. And it's normal that people continue their lives while you're still processing.
Yeah, life has to go on, and we need people around us who are promising that that's possible by doing it.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
we don't
Yes.
want to assume that, oh, well, I guess they're just not grieving anymore. Grief is such a personal journey. We can't possibly know what's going on in the mind or heart of someone else, particularly around the death or loss of someone. So we want to be
Yeah.
really careful, not to make those judgments. We want to, as you said, give that grace. We don't want to judge not just others, but ourselves also. And you know, it is hard that the world continues to move forward, but also what other chance do we really have of, you know, jumping back in to life itself, which is ultimately what we need to do if we want to, you know, have any quality of life after our
Yeah,
loss. So,
yeah, for sure, for sure.
well, thanks for joining today, and we appreciate your support and your interest. If you are enjoying this episode, please go ahead and like it and also subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you again in the next chat. Thank you.
Bye bye.